Thank you for listening to the P-Pod from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. Due to the nature of this podcast, themes relating to the abuse and neglect of children are discussed. Therefore, listener discretion is advised and the content unsuitable for children.
Welcome to the P-Pod.
Welcome back to the P-Pod, the partnership podcast from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. What we want to pick up on today is, over quite a number of episodes now, we've spoken to our colleagues from the police. And quite often when we think about the police, we think about our uniformed officers that we see out on the street, or we might be thinking about our detectives working in the background solving crimes. But there is much, much more to the police than just that. So I'm really pleased today to invite my guests along to talk about quite a specific area of work they do within the police. And I have with me today Alison and Tim from the Southern Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit. Welcome along, both of you. Thanks for joining me. I just wondered, could you introduce yourselves and your role just to get us going?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Alison Jenkinson and I am the Regional Manager of the Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit in the southern part of the force.
Hello everyone, Tim McDonald. I'm a decision maker within the Southern Lighthouse Unit.
Thank you for that, and thanks for starting us off. Now, I think the Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit, or LSU, because we love an acronym, is possibly an area of policing that people may not be quite so aware of. You're not sort of so much there out in the foreground that we think of in terms of policing quite often. But I know you guys play a really, really vital role in terms of safeguarding, in terms of support for victims, in terms of making sure that actually policing is affecting and moving forward, not just about sort of detecting crimes and responding to crimes as such. So for anybody that's not heard of the LSU before, would you be able to give us a bit of an overview about what you are, what you do?
Yeah, sure. So the LSU, or the Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit. So that's a safeguarding unit of Avon and Somerset Police. And we support victims of crime and safeguarding arrangements across the force area. So obviously we have 5 local authority areas within our force area, which we work with when it comes to safeguarding arrangements. And also we support victims of crime from pre-charge right through to post-charge as well. So that's before police have charged a suspect with a crime. We're co-located with partners across our force in 3 areas, Cambridgeshire, Bristol and Bridgewater. So that means that we've got a really good local community, really. We're based within our communities. But our hubs work together to ensure that we're working across the force as well. So whilst we might have our hubs, we also work together to provide that support across the force. The way that we actually work is probably the easiest way to explain what we do, if that makes sense. So if a police officer is called out to an incident and they recognise a vulnerability, what they will do is that they will fill in what we call a risk assessment. And that could either be a brag for vulnerability or a dash when we're talking about domestic incidences. From that assessment, we will get tasked through to the Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit. And if there's a crime attached, it will go to our victim side. And if there isn't a crime attached, it will go to our vulnerability side or our safeguarding side. And it will be reviewed and it will be looked at, and we will make decisions as to whether or not we're going to share that information with any of our safeguarding or support partners. So that is kind of like the essence, really, of the core function of the Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit. But we also do have smaller teams within the Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit who do more bespoke work as well, which I go further into as well.
Yeah, no, it'd be good to sort of pick into that. And just to pick up as well, at the start, we obviously introduced you as being from the Southern Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit, obviously referring to there's also a Northern Safeguarding Unit as well.
Yeah.
Because I know that's changed over, when did that change? Year and a half, 2 years ago, I'm going to say now.
Yeah.
Is there a sort of difference between the two?
Locality-wise, I suppose. So within the Southern Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit, we work with our partners in Somerset, but also in North Somerset. And within our Northern Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit, we work with the local authority areas of Bristol, Baines and South Gloss. And we all do the same processes, we all do the same things, but obviously we've all grown in different ways and worked with our partners for our communities. So we're all set up a little bit differently in each area.
Do you see much of a difference between the two areas now in terms of those needs in the different areas as opposed to Somerset, North Somerset compared with, say, Bristol, which is kind of quite a different geographical area? Do you see much of a difference in the sort of things that come your way, or is it kind of fairly similar, fairly consistent?
I would say it's the same work they have up there that we have down here, whether you're talking about MARC, child strategies, adult strategies, mental health risk assessments, those sort of things. It's all the same work. It's the workloads that maybe is slightly different. and slight nuances, but it is the same work.
That's good to know, because sometimes there's a perception that things are very different in, say, a very urban area compared to a very rural area. And Somerset's a funny old mix of areas in terms of rural and urban, and poverty and affluence within the same county. So we're a bit of a big bag of everything, aren't we, I think?
Absolutely. And I think, we always see spikes. So obviously, like when you talk about knife crime with younger people, that is everywhere. However, we have had spikes of a lot of incidences within a short period of time in Bristol. And so therefore it becomes people's perception of that it's only a Bristol thing, whilst actually knife crime with youths is everywhere.
So what sort of volumes of cases are we talking about? So on an annual basis? I presume you guys are pretty busy a lot of the time in terms of, already what you've talked about in terms of domestic abuse incidents or serious youth violence. Is there a lot sort of coming through your doors?
Yeah. So when I say that the police go out to an incident and if they see a vulnerability, they will complete either a brag or a dash. Those occurrences are then tasked through to us at the Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit, and we receive nearly 80,000 incidents per year, but we're tasked more than that. So you'll be seeing over 100,000 tasks out of those 80,000 incidences. So that's what's coming into our unit across the force. And that converts into around 40,000 referrals or notifications out to our partners, where we're sharing that information for safeguarding purposes with our safeguarding partners.
That sounds like a very busy day.
It's a very busy
I was trying
day.
to do some calculations in my head, sort of 100,000-ish, and then breaking that down to 365 days in a year. I know that's a massive volume. Out of that, what would you say are the majority of those things that come into you?
It will be domestic incidences, yeah. So around 42%, so around 33,000, and relate to domestic incidences. And it's about 67% of those would be crimes, would have a crime attached to them, and the others would be what we call non-crime. So it's a domestic incident, but they haven't had an actual crime identified within that incident, if that makes sense. So domestic abuse or domestic incident would be what we see the most, or what comes in the most.
I think actually just something to clarify at the start here maybe might be useful, because I think sometimes people hear about services and they hear about different programs that are taking place and they go, oh, brilliant, actually, I've got a family I could think that might be really useful for somebody. In terms of the work you do and kind of, I guess, for want of a better word, referrals, I think just to sort of make clear in terms of referrals coming into you, it's not this is just open to anybody and anybody just refer to you.
So the LSU is an internal police system in reality. It's where the police staff, police officers have gone to something where there's a safeguarding concern or identified that there's an enhanced service required for a victim or something along those lines. Those referrals are for us and they come into us, and it gets split either way, i.e. into the Lighthouse side, which would be victim rights care officers, or into what we call the safeguarding side, but titled the vulnerability. So it gets split slightly like that. Be honest, because obviously we work in hubs, and those hubs are all mashes with each local authority. Any professional within that mash, as it were, can contact the LSU, either safeguarding side of it, and have conversations with the decision makers or the safeguarding officers in order to try and maybe understand the referral or the risk or part of the risk that they're trying to view and assess themselves. And we can sometimes assist with that. But of course, we assist with that with formal meetings, let's say. We don't actually have any referral mechanism into us from outside the organisation.
So what you're saying is it would be more like, say, an internal police side of things, but then potentially disseminating that out in terms of if you have specific concerns or if you identify a specific need there that somebody might be able to support with, it's then making sure that right support is in place, I guess. If I can just take us back just for a second there, Tim, you mentioned about MASH, which some people might be very familiar with. Other people might be thinking, what is he talking about? Is he talking about potatoes or something like that for a minute? Would you be able to clarify what MASH is for anybody that's not aware?
A MASH stands for a multi-agency safeguarding hub, and therefore the acronym again. Within a MASH, you have the partner agencies. So you have children's social care, health, and the police. We are the three core partners involved in relation to that. And depending upon where you are, we are co-located all together, let's say, or we're not. It just depends what local authority or whereabouts you are. So the MASH generally receives referral. Children's social care will receive referral. They will then contact health and us to maybe have what we call a MASH meeting, a MASH discussion. So that's below the level of a strategy discussion. And share their concerns. We share the police information, health will share their information, and then hopefully come up with a plan as to how we can then move forward with that. Does it need an assessment, or does it need to go to a strategy? But it depends again with the different local authorities what happens in relation to that.
Yeah, and for anybody that's listened to any previous podcasts that we've done, we've had colleagues say from the family front door for children's services. I'm sure you'd have heard those sort of hearing over time. We're based in Bridgewater Police Station, and that's the aim of that, actually, is get people co-located, sitting together to actually have conversations and understand situations, sometimes through MASH, in terms of information that comes in. Well, what does this actually look like when we join up these dots a little bit, which is we always know is so key, isn't it, when it comes to safeguarding children. So thanks for that. And we've mentioned already around domestic abuse, and Alison just quoted to what percentage around domestic abuse. What are the sort of themes that you see coming in through your door? Do you get sort of common things other than, we'll pick up around domestic abuse in a bit if that's okay, but is there anything else you kind of see coming through your door?
We absolutely do. And we will tend to find that most of our meetings that we attend are in relation to safeguarding children. However, Tim, we were talking about this yesterday, Tim, weren't we, about how we've noticed an increase in relation to young people with mental health concerns over the last couple of years, especially since COVID. We absolutely see that something rising. We all often see within the incidences that we're reviewing and sharing with our partners links to substance misuse, mental health, and also violence. However, when it comes to mental health, we don't have a mental health referral pathway currently from police, from the Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit. And so a theme, I suppose, is our teams feeling frustrated that they don't have that referral pathway to share concerns with our mental health colleagues.
Is that more around parental mental health or children's mental health, or both?
Both. So usually when we're talking about mental health services, we're usually talking about how we can refer to adult mental health, and there is no current pathway there. In relation to children's mental health, we are looking currently at pathways to send notifications to CAMS if we know a child is open to CAMS. So we're currently working with CAMS colleagues across the force, because what we're trying to do is we're doing it in one area, we want to do it across the force as well. So we're currently having discussion with CAMS colleagues across the force area about how we can know whether or not a young person is open to CAMS. And if they are, we can then share incidences or information with CAMS, knowing that that child or that young person is open to them, so that their support worker has the information that they need to safeguard that young person appropriately.
It's a real challenge. And I'm really interested that you picked out around mental health, because I think it is a growing area of consideration, both in terms of nationally, in terms of statutory guidance, the changing the definition around safeguarding, including mental health for the first time, just going back to 2020 now, and trying to focus on that. And people often hear me say in training, it's there, it's a responsibility. I think, personally speaking, right the way across the country, we've still got a long way to go with this. And I imagine it must be quite difficult for officers on the street, responders who are maybe dealing with incidents at 3:00 in the morning where a young person is really struggling with their mental health. They've kicked off in the home. Parents are going, we can't cope with this. Officers are coming out to that. And then I imagine there would be an anticipation from parents to go, oh, great, the police are here now. Everything's sorted. They'll sort everything out. But that expectation of like, well, hang on. Like you say, officers are not mental health specialists. They're there to support and trying to prevent crime ultimately. But then you've got this whole additional bit on there. And I guess that's quite key in terms of the role of the LSU, isn't it? It's not just the crime aspect of it. It's actually the wider aspects of how we prevent this from taking place and how we safeguard and protect victims as well.
And that's really the point of information sharing. So if we have an incident and we have concerns about somebody and we share that with our safeguarding colleagues, they put that with the information that they know, and then they can support that vulnerable person, whether or not that's a child or an adult, and hopefully then get the right support at the right time so that we don't see that young person again or that vulnerable person again. So we're not going around in that circle. When it comes to police officers, and Tim used to be a police officer actually, so we might be able to talk more to this than myself. Police officers, when they're out and about in our communities, as you quite rightly say, Steve, they're not mental health expert. And this is a bit where right care, right person came in to make sure that you've got the right professional at the right time for that person, whereby I think quite a lot of the times police were looked upon, we'll attend everything, basically, the police. If we're called to something, but historically we would attend everything, but we're not always the right person to attend. And sometimes we're the worst person to attend, because if somebody's having a mental health crisis, the last person they need turning up is a uniformed police officer.
What I was going to say was that when there's an acute episode that the officers are going to, whether that is adults or, I appreciate we're talking about children, so here, let's say, they have the advantage that the control room, even Somerset control room, has immediate access to mental health workers who are sort of located with them. And so they can look quickly at records, see if there's, I'm going to say, a safety plan around that individual, how we should be maybe trying to treat them or deal with them. But then, unfortunately, there are a lot of individuals that we're not trained to say that they have mental health issues, but we think they've got mental health issues, and you then talk to our colleagues and it comes back they're not open to mental health. There's nothing they can do. And so it's really quite difficult at that moment in time for those officers to deal with that. And that's then, again, where we come back in, because then hours later, the next morning, the next day, we are then getting the tasks that come in about that individual. And then we need to assess them, do the risk assessment and pass it on to our partners if we can. But as Alison's already mentioned, there are issues regarding referrals to mental health teams, whether that's children or adults. However, there is a work in progress to try and improve that.
Yeah. Because I imagine on the back of that, particularly, again, maybe when we're talking about either domestic abuse or mental health needs, particularly in terms of mental health, we know it can fluctuate and often does fluctuate. I would guess on the back of that, do you see people repeatedly coming back? And you mentioned earlier about trying to prevent that cycle. Do you see that cycle taking place?
We see constantly it's the same individuals, children, as well as adults, but children who are, dare I say it, standing on the wrong side of that barrier over a bridge over the motorway or a road or whatever. And it is always the same individuals. It's very rarely that you get that referral comes in and you see it and you think, oh, well, that's not happened with that individual before. It nearly always has. And they will be detained as well. Hopefully they're talked down, they get detained, and then unfortunately we can be back there within a week, 2 weeks, a month. And as you said, it fluctuates. The individuals can become well, but then unfortunately their health can decrease as well either. So it's a common theme with those particular individuals.
No, I can see that. And I know there is work taking place, certainly within Somerset and possibly force-wide, around looking at individuals, particularly around, from our perspective, from the children's focus, about that good, effective planning around that, where those sort of repeat customers, to use a better phrase. It's not a very good phrase, but where actually we need to come up with much better contingency planning, knowing that actually these are likely to happen again. So how do we respond to that collectively as multi-agency partners coming together? Because like I say, it doesn't do anybody any good at all just to keep on going round and round in this cycle. And I think I can imagine certainly leaves officers feeling quite lost about where do we go with this, and probably the individuals involved as well, just going round and round and round in this system. And obviously you work with a lot of, well, probably all aspects of the police force. I'm just wondering, in terms of sort of how it fits in terms of some of the specific police operations that we've spoken to before, in fact, the Internet Child Abuse Team or Operation Ruby.
So within our team, we work with Operation Ruby, most notably, and most close, the closest, let's say, because at the end of the day, they are our child protection team, as they were called before. But like you've just said, you've got the Internet Child Abuse Team. You've got Operation Bluestone that deals with the sexual offences. You've got the CID that will deal with other matters that don't fit into their criteria, let's say, but also the neighbourhood policing team about antisocial behaviour, that sort of stuff. So we're all the time touching base with them about individual families. Sometimes we'll work directly with the control rooms, because you could have an acute episode that's going on that's come via us, and it can be very difficult for those individuals to say send them away and go, no, you call 101 or call 909. We'll then get hold of the control rooms ASAP as we can. We can email them directly. So we've got an incident that's going on here now. We need a police officer to go there. So that will happen. Or you'll just get a matter whereby officers are asking for inquiries as to how to do a particular thing. How can I fill this form out? How can I have an example only last week where I had an officer who was dealing with a young child who had been arrested for a matter, and he was being processed, he's been interviewed, and they're now completing what they call a youth justice referral form to see how it might progress or not. And that officer was asking for help to fill it in, and they'd come across the trigger plan for this child who, when they go missing, and within that trigger plan there was some quite important information that they felt should be on the referral form to the youth justice panel. Yet there was a caveat within the trigger form saying this can't be used outside the police or outside of children's social care. As a result of that, I had a conversation with one of the first response team managers. I said, look, we've got this. What we want to do is share a bit of information that's on that, because it would help the youth panel to understand maybe why the decision making of this child wasn't so good because of a health condition, but a health matter. And as a result, we shared that, and that officer, I've then said, well, yes, go ahead and use it. We think it's appropriate to use it. So anything from that all the way to a live incident to, like say, Op Ruby, where there's been a Section 47 joint investigation, can you go out and do that?
You guys are busy, aren't you? I'm just coming, if we can just come back for a moment around domestic abuse as well, because I know you mentioned that earlier, and that's kind of one of the big sort of aspects of your work as well. What do you kind of see around domestic abuse coming into you? And I guess, sorry, I've got several questions in one, I guess. And firstly, I know there was a concern going back to COVID lockdown periods that there was going to be a massive steep rise in domestic abuse incidents. And I don't believe, and please jump in and correct me, but I don't believe we actually saw that. But in terms of domestic abuse generally, is that something that you're seeing increasing in terms of call outs, or is that sort of remaining fairly steady? The reason I'm asking, I think about things like the Domestic Abuse Act coming in 2021. And sometimes when you highlight things to people through new pieces of legislation or training or anything like that, it can kind of lead to a steep rise in things. And do you see that taking place?
Well, I would say, if I answer it this way, slightly, instead of call outs to it, because I end up going to the child strategies, 90% of my work is child strategies. I mean, the other part is adult safeguarding meetings and risk assessment of mental health, let's say. But 90% of it is child strategies. We have definitely seen a rise in child strategies where it relates to domestics between the parents or father and girlfriend, mother and girlfriend, whoever it is, as it were. And there's definitely a rise of that, seeing a lot more of that, I would suggest.
Right. And in terms of those responses to domestic abuse, because it's such a high figure, what sort of responses do you have around, from a wider policing view? I know slightly out of your remit, around sort of domestic abuse, but also in terms of responding to victims of domestic abuse?
We have, I would suggest, a positive arrest policy in relation to when you go to domestic. We should be seeking to safeguard the victim, and generally the safest way of doing that is to remove the individual, and that's by arresting them and then investigating the crimes that we have. But outside of that, though, when a task comes, so that's the immediate response. But then for us in the Lighthouse, the task will come into the Lighthouse. It will go to either the victim side of matters or down to us. And if it goes to the victim witness care officers, they then making direct contact with those victims. And they can give them an enhanced support system. They can refer them to supporting agencies. And at the same time, those officers are then making referrals to children's social care if there are children involved, or it could be adult social care. So there's a lot of practice that is not seen, but there is victim contact. Whether it be having what we call the bobby van going around and making the home safe from the perpetrator, changing the locks on the windows and the doors, helping with alarm systems, camera systems, etc.
Is that still going, actually? I didn't know the bobby van was still going.
Yeah, well, as far as I'm concerned, the bobby van is still going. Yeah, it's still in existence. Yes.
Just called something different now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not called that anymore. I'm showing my age.
Just to add to what Tim has just said, really, so that victim witness care officer will do like a needs assessment with that victim to assess and just see what supports systems they can signpost them to or refer to. We've also got Op and Compass, whereby we're sending notifications through to schools so that schools know to support children who've been exposed to domestic abuse. We're currently improving the process so that we can send notifications directly to education settings, which currently we haven't been able to do. And obviously within the Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit, I think Tim's mentioned, we also support our MARIC arrangements across all 5 local authority areas as well. And we have police representatives within there. And also within the Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit, we have our disclosure team as well. And our disclosure team also processes all of the domestic violence disclosure scheme applications. So all of those also come through the Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit. And our disclosure team will research, write disclosures, decide upon disclosures, but also deliver those disclosures as well. So there's a big response to domestic abuse, not just within even the Somerset Police, but within the Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit as well.
Picking up on that as well, if we go back to the Domestic Abuse Act, obviously sort of having a couple of really significant changes in it. One around the definition of domestic abuse, including control and coercive behaviour for the first time. But really importantly, from a children's safeguarding perspective, recognising children as victims of that domestic abuse if they've witnessed it. Have you seen much of a change either widely from policing or from yourselves in terms of responding to children as victims?
Within the police, when we consider children victims of domestic abuse, whilst we're doing that for support purposes, absolutely, and they're recorded on our systems for that purpose, they're not considered victims of the crime of domestic abuse, if that makes sense.
We haven't changed our processes in any way in relation to that necessarily. But what I will say is that Home Office counting rules has really come into play recently. This is so that the national government at the end of the day knows exactly what is happening out there. And obviously helps us as Avon Somerset Police to understand what's going on. And it means that we are recording far greater crimes now within a domestic abuse situation. Whereas previously, we go to a domestic abuse incident and let's say the father has assaulted mother in front of the children, let's say, and we just record one crime. That doesn't really happen now. What happened? You might record the crime, which is the assault on the mother. But then as for the children, that will be crimed, but it'll probably be crimed as neglect in reality, not a domestic assault, but a neglect, but it is domestic related. I can't imagine, or I don't know what the figures are necessarily because I don't know them, but the amount it's gone up is huge. So every child that's in that house who's witnessing that, there will probably be a crime for neglect.
Right. For each individual
and each child is a victim, is recorded as a victim independently, albeit it's the same incident, let's say, that took place.
So we won't be investigating it separately, if that makes sense. So whilst it's recorded as each child is a victim, we're not separately investigating it as that child being the victim, if that makes sense. If it went to court, it would be around with the example that Tim's just said, it would be around the assault against the mother, not the neglect with the children, even though that's how it's being recorded.
It's an interesting one. Sorry for throwing that one in there, but it's an interesting one, I think, because sometimes you look at a piece of legislation that passed, and on the surface it looks pretty straightforward and common sense, but when you really start digging into it and thinking about it, it's massively complex. I know in terms of Domestic Abuse Act, it came in 21, but in reality, it's only when it becomes case law that actually these things start actually being put into practice. And I don't think we're quite there yet. We're starting to see some things trickle through court. But I always say it raises 101 questions, which I don't think we collectively across the country have got answers to at the moment.
No.
And I often get questions about saying, well, if there was historic domestic abuse that took place and that child, and say parents have split and that child is still going to go and see that parent, how is that responded to now? Insofar as if, say, it came to light that there have been sexual offences taking place against children, you wouldn't say, okay, well, that's fine for that child to continue to go and stay with that parent. So I don't know the answers to those, is the honest truth. And I think it will take a bit of time for this to bed out. But I know there's always a lot of questions that come up from it. But it's interesting sort of hearing, like in terms of recognising children from police's perspective as victims of a crime, but ultimately still needing to respond to it with the safeguarding hat on, because obviously that's the main focus that we need to be thinking about. Yeah, it's a difficult balance, I think, sometimes in looking at putting new legislation particularly into practice. I think the other thing I was really keen to pick up on today as well, if it's okay, is obviously as a local Safeguarding Children partnership and as a network locally, we've been doing a lot of work around trauma-informed practice. And we also, for anybody listening to the podcast, you'll know we've had a series running on trauma-informed practice as well. And I was really keen, if it's all right, to pick up with you around that, because I know in particular from the Avon and Somerset Police's perspective, Sarah Crew is driven for the whole of the police-wide force to become a trauma-informed organisation, which is, again, one of these things that seems fairly straightforward on the surface, but actually is a lot to think about and a lot to implement. And from your perspective, from the LSU, I know I'm obviously working with or supporting victims and finding the right support for victims. Having that trauma-informed approach would be quite key. So it's just what's that kind of looking like for you, either at the moment or kind of aspirationally, kind of where you're heading?
Yeah, absolutely. So training, I would say, but also culture. So we've got to shift into a culture of being trauma-informed and being professionally curious, because they kind of go hand in hand, I think, as well. And you're quite right. Even in Somerset, we're actively working to embed that trauma-informed approach across all aspects of policing and being a trauma-informed organisation. So when it comes to training across the force, response and neighbourhood policing teams, so our cops on the street, all of their training now is trauma-informed, has trauma-informed aspects to it. Within the Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit, all of our teams attend the multi-agency introduction to child protection, but also the advanced, which obviously you lead on, Steve, in Somerset. And there's always a trauma-informed aspect within that training as well. Our victim and witness care officers who actually speak to victims of crime. So our safeguarding officers who refer to safeguarding partners where there's no crime don't tend to speak to, or do not speak to our communities. However, our victim witness care officers do. They pick up the phone and they speak to victims of crime. They speak to witnesses when preparing them for court. And they are all trained to recognise signs of trauma and to adapt their communication whilst they're talking to that victim, and to provide the appropriate support and ensuring that the victims are not re-traumatised in the conversations that they're having with them. And when the victim witness care officers are considering signposting to different services, they're not just thinking about what does that person need now, they're thinking about what that person may need in the future as well. And when I'll go out and I'll do training for neighbourhood policing teams or new PCSOs, and I always make sure that we have the content in there around being professionally curious and the importance of being professionally curious and the importance of being trauma informed as well. So not only will the police officers get that training within the training school, whenever we do top up training as well from a safeguarding perspective, we always make sure it's included in there as well. We've also got programs of change going on at the moment within the force. And what we are calling Programme 2 is around how we respond to victims and vulnerability. And that is all centred around how we improve our BRAG tool, our risk assessing tools, introducing of secondary risk assessment. And all of these are to prompt people to think about trauma and to think about the impact that that incident may have had on somebody, and what signs can you look for to identify that and what you should do next. So it's all of these prompts coming in to make sure that people are constantly thinking about being trauma-informed and professionally curious.
I'm just thinking that as you were talking there, I remember on some of the training that we were doing, we had some of your officers on there. I think it was the victim support officers who, like you say, were making those phone calls. I do remember we had some really good conversations around adapting your approach and how you say things depending on the circumstances. I remember having some really good conversations with them where they were really trying to kind of pick this apart, kind of go, well, if we pick up the phone and say, hi, we're the police, you may get one response from one person, but at the same time, we've got to be open and honest about who we are and what we're there for and what have you. And so we were just kind of within the room, just sort of bouncing around. Okay, well, if you have to kind of deliver this news, or if you had to have this conversation, how do you think you could approach it? And they were really keen to kind of take that on board and go, actually, what about, hang on, we could do it like this. And sort of seeing them sitting on the table, sort of scratching their heads going, hang on, but if we kind of said that and we kind of did this, and it's not about fluffing things or not being open. It's about being open and honest, but actually it's about how we phrase things and recognizing that sometimes for some people, if you phone up and go, well, hi, we've had a call from so-and-so, this is the police, that might massively trigger somebody and you'd get the barriers up. Whereas actually, if you approach it in a slightly different way, still being open and honest, but approaching it a slightly different way, actually, you may get a very, very different response.
Absolutely.
And using a trauma-informed approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a real skill talking on the phone as well and communicating with somebody on the phone. And, if somebody's getting irate and stuff, keeping calm so you bring them down and not matching their level of anxiety. So, it's a real skill.
Just keying in with that as well. And Tim, you mentioned earlier in terms of working with youth justice a lot in the work you do around children and young people. I know a big focus around that is around restorative justice approaches. Is that something that you look to do within the LSU as well, or sort of linking in with partner agencies around that?
So within the LSU, there is an individual who works within the LSU who is part of the restorative justice team. Restorative justice is an approach to justice that focuses on repairing the harm caused by the crime and the conflict by bringing both the affected victim and the offenders, and sometimes community members, in order to have a structured, safe meeting where instead of punishing the offender, it's about learning what their actions have caused. And as a result of that, then think about, maybe I won't do that the next time type of thing. So it encourages accountability, understanding, allows the victims to heal, and maybe even the perpetrators, really, at the end of the day. It empowers the victims to give a voice and hopefully would allow them to help in the rehabilitation of the offender as well. So we have, like I said, there is one particular officer who is overseeing that within the LSU and who manages that and then helps guide it through the process.
But there's only certain crimes that we can consider for it. We can't consider it for all crimes. So higher crimes or high-end crimes, it's not something that we'd be able to consider. But for lower-end crimes, it's absolutely something that the victim witness care officers would be advocating for in those conversations with their victims.
Yeah, I know. And I can see for some crimes or some circumstances, it would not be appropriate at all. And if you've been a victim of a serious sexual assault, coming face to face with the perpetrator of that would not be. Yeah, and again, talking about that trauma-informed approach would certainly not be a trauma-informed approach from the perspective probably of that victim.
Yeah, and because we want to increase the way that we use restorative justice, that's one of the reasons why we've brought the restorative justice officer into the Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit for that onward learning with our victim witness care officers, so they know where it is appropriate to facilitate and support a restorative justice outcome for their victim. So that's why we brought that role into the Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit, to increase and use restorative justice more as an outcome.
If you don't mind, there's one other area I was really curious to explore with you today. And again, it's a question that comes up, or a quandary that comes up sometimes. And I'm thinking particularly about children, young people around exploitation. And I think something that people struggle with a little bit sometimes is about responding to children, young people as victims, as well as where they may also be perpetrators of crimes as well. And we sort of talk about child-on-child abuse. How do you kind of work with that in the wider system around supporting children, young people around exploitation, as recognise them as victims, but also kind of acknowledging the crime that they may have also committed?
Within the safeguarding arrangements with our partners, we are identifying people who are vulnerable or and experiencing exploitation. We have the missing persons team. They review all missing person episodes to ensure that any associated concerns around exploitation is identified and actioned accordingly. You can look at the risk outside the home in relation to that as well. There are numerous meetings across all 5 local authorities that all have different names for them, as it were, but it's basically about risk outside the home and lots of different acronyms. Quite a lot of those, though, those meetings are attended by the neighbourhood policing teams or the early intervention team within the police, because they're the ones who are out there on the street trying to work with those individuals who may be perpetrators, but at the same time, because of their vulnerabilities, we are fully aware that they are victims themselves. We also have risks of being outside the home as identified, but the traditional child protection conferences, that's where those matters are discussed as well. And conferences will be not only attended by case conference officers, but the intervention teams or the neighbourhood policing teams who are working with those individuals. And then, of course, we have OPTOPAS, which is the team that are looking at sexual exploitation. We work closely with them, but not necessarily with them all the time, because they are constantly having, OPTOPAS, for example, constantly having meetings with the local authorities that they are the areas they cover, with your own child sex exploitation teams, where they meet together and talk about individuals who are maybe perpetrators, who are definitely vulnerable and definitely victims as well. And then there's the national referral mechanism in relation to children that are involved in maybe county lines, for example, and looking at that side of it and putting in the application forms in relation to a referral for that. We're a bit of a conduit, but we don't do anything along the lines of the national referral mechanism. That's outside of us.
But I think from everything we've been talking about today, those links with partners are so key, isn't it? Like you say, and obviously working very closely with children's services and also operation, different operations or different aspects of police as well. And I guess, have you got really good links as well? I'm just thinking in terms of, we talked about mental health services earlier, sometimes being challenging there, but have you got good links with things like drug and alcohol services in the areas and what have you as well?
We generally don't deal with individuals, I would say, within those teams. It's the OPTOPAS, the neighbourhood teams, early intervention teams that are dealing with those particular work. And probably, I would imagine, joint working with them when they're going out in the streets, walking around, they will be together doing that. Whereas we are attending the strategy meetings, and then there are the side assets worker is in there, and the early intervention team are also in the strategy meeting with us. We might meet the individuals, but we're not working with the children specifically about that.
No.
It's more of a strategic approach around the children, how to go forward with those individual children.
Yeah.
But that collaborative work is happening out there.
Lovely. Thank you, Tim. Just to kind of round things off, if we can, I was just thinking in terms of Mythbusters, if you want, or anything you wish people knew about the LSU and the work you do, or anything that you want to kind of dispel or anything like that? Is there any kind of key messages you want to get out to people at all from today?
I think when you're talking about like what the LSU is not, I think we've kind of like alluded to it a little bit, as in when it comes to risk outside the home, whilst we deal with the majority of safeguarding issues where there is a subject matter expert, therefore you would have your OPRUBY, your Octoplas, Bluestone, but also early intervention team when it comes to risk outside the home. So we're kind of like the generic or general safeguarding, if you like. We're not necessarily the subject matter experts for those individual things. I always find whenever I go to a meeting...
I would like to say, Alison, you're the glue that holds them together.
Lovely. And like I find, I'm sure Tim finds as well, when you go to a meeting and somebody hears that you're from the police, they think you know everything about policing. Whilst I've never been a police officer before, and my roles within safeguarding, I've been within the Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit or within that area for over 20 years. So I've got a lot of safeguarding experience. However, I'm not a police expert, if that makes sense. However, I'll always go and find out the answer for you. I think it's also just to note that we're not a unit to report crime to. So if there is a crime that you need to report, that should be done via 101, who are set up to receive and record that information. But likewise, we're not an emergency response either. If there's an ongoing incident, then people should be dialing 999. As Tim said, we will help out and be that conduit between local authorities and our police on the street when we're considering, right, somebody's gone missing, we need a strategy right now, let's put that all out together. So we're in that kind of live response we are. However, there's an emergency response we're needed there and then in the community. We are not the team to be calling. So I just wanted to point that out. And I think also we are Avon and Somerset Police. I think sometimes, especially when we first got brought together, Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit, people would say, oh, are you going to refer that into the Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit? And didn't know that we were part of Avon and Somerset Police, where we are absolutely Avon and Somerset Police through and through. Everybody who works there are either police officers or police staff working for Avon and Somerset Police. So that's just a couple of the things that I just wanted to myth bust there. Tim, have you got anything else that you want to add?
I'm not so sure it's necessarily a myth necessarily, but the decision makers are not all police officers. And yes, I might have experience of being a police officer, but there are other colleagues of mine who have never worked for the police before, come from different departments. I can remember somebody coming from probation, for example, working up in the northeast, and then someone came from a safeguarding environment within a school to us. So they've never worked in the police, whereas you'll see on the minute sometimes they'll give you you're a police officer, as it were, and so on, and that's not necessarily the case. The other thing that maybe people don't understand about what we do as decision makers, and I'm not talking about the victim care officers, is we are not public facing. So we don't have conversations with the public. We don't make those phone calls, get in contact with people. We are very much about working with our colleagues within Avon Somerset and then our partner agencies in relation to safeguarding. And I don't know if anybody is aware of this necessarily, but we basically work alongside the core hours that children's social care works. So it's 8 to 5 every day for us, and Fridays like 4:30. And like it goes to EDT for social services, it then goes to the duty teams that are on, for example, late to a Ruby or the duty DS, depending on the type of job it would be.
Well, like you say, you're not an emergency response part of the force. No. You're there to make sure the victims are getting the right support moving forward, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I just wanted to reiterate really what Tim just said there about in the vulnerability side of the Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit, we're not working with our communities. We're supporting the safeguarding arrangements for our 5 local authority areas, and we're sharing information, and we're having those risk assessments, and we're attending child protection conferences, American strategies, etc. We're not actually actively going out and working with our families.
Being the glue that holds it together. There you go. I could use that as a strapline if you want.
I'm having it.
Well, listen, Alison, Tim, thank you so much for joining me today. I've been sitting here thinking that I've had that figure of 100,000 going through my head a year, and thinking, God, how many have come in this last hour or so since we've been recording this? I'm feeling the stress for you, I think, as it comes through. So I will thank you very much for taking the time out today to come and join and talk to us, and wish you the best of luck moving forward with things. And as Tim alluded to a little bit earlier, there is lots of change afoot, not just within the Avon Somerset Police, not just within Somerset, but nationally at the moment in terms of how we work together, which is going to mean a lot of change for everybody moving forward. So Alice and I were saying just before we recorded this, you never know, we may well be talking again at some point in in the near future about what things are looking like at that point, I think. It'd be interesting to see and exciting.
Thank you for having us.
Great stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you so much then. Take care of yourselves. See you later.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheerio. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And if you're curious there about what it was we were referring to at the end of that episode, I'd advise checking out the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, which is currently going through the House of Lords as we speak, as well as associated with that, the Families First Partnership Programme, which is due to bring in some very exciting changes moving forward about how we work together as multi-agency partners. Now, as always, if you'd like to find out more details on the topics discussed in today's episode, please go to the SSCP website at somersetsafeguardingchildren.org.uk or by following any of the links in this episode description. If you enjoy listening to the P-Pod, we would really appreciate it if you did take that time to follow or subscribe to us on your chosen platform, or even better, leave us a review and let other people know about it, and make sure to let your colleagues know about this podcast and encourage them to come and join us here as well. It really does help to spread the word. Now, if you have any questions or comments arising from today's episode, or would be interested in being involved in future episodes, we would love you to get in touch with us at thepod@somerset.gov.uk. Once again, I'd like to give a huge thank you to my guests today, Alison Jenkinson and Tim McDonald from the Avon and Somerset Police's Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit. And as always, I'd like to thank you for listening. My name is Steve Macabee, and I'm the training manager for the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. And I look forward to you joining us again next time at the P-Pod.
Let's work together to help keep children safe.